Right, hi everyone. Today we're going to be just taking a look at the power of CSS. Is kind of what I called it. Basically, what I'm going to do is we'll have this page, which I've gotten ready here, and we'll have two different versions of this page, which we're going to create. So let me just show you the other version. So we've kind of got two very different styles of page, but it's going to be the same HTML underneath. The only thing that we're changing is the CSS. Okay, so here is my code. This is the HTML I've created. You can just open that with the live server. All right. So this is our HTML, pretty lifeless at the moment, but as we work, we'll hopefully transform it into the different sites. And yeah, so let's just get started on that. So I can go to here, and I'm just going to create a CSS folder, and I'm going to create two different CSS files. I'm going to call the one business.css, and I'm going to create I'm going to call it safari.css. That's what I'm kind of calling that other style. And I've linked to them here. I'll start on the business.css. Okay, so let's just make sure that that's all linked up correctly. I'm going to just go half and half here. And so if I go to business.css and I just quickly say body, background blue. Is that loading correctly? I've called it the wrong thing. Let's rename that. Okay. So no, we're working with something that's working. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set a font on my body. I've already gone and added the Google fonts here. So I've got Merriweather, Quicksand, and Montserrat to add to the page. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And I'll say that I want the font family to be Montserrat. I'll add Verdana as a backup. And then sans serif, right? Okay, so there, Montserrat's coming through. I'd like a max width on this. So I'm going to have max width of 1,200 pixels. And I want it to be centered on the page. Okay, so there it's centered on the page. The next thing is I want to add my Merriweather font to these H1s, the headings, I mean, H1, H2, and H3. You can just add backup for H4 in case. And we'll set those to have a font family of Merriweather. Let's add Georgia and serif. So there we kind of get a bit of a businessy feel. So the text is easy to read, and the headings are kind of a little bit more classical, I guess, because they are a serif. The next thing I'd like to do is I'm going to add, so in my index here, let's just a word wrap so we can see easily. I've got my header here. And so I just want to add a background to that header. So let's go header, background, and we'll add a URL. And we want to go to the images folder. And I want the desk image. And we'll set it to no repeat. And I'll come back to the positioning now. Let's say background size of cover. Okay. That needs a bit of height because it's cropping a bit weirdly. Let's add a height of 400 pixels. That looks a bit better. But I'd actually like, because if you have a look at this image, it's got quite a lot of space here, and especially on, if you view it like that, I actually want to use this additional space here to be able to position things. So what I want is I just want to nudge that down a little bit. So I can actually set the positioning of the background image, and I can say that I want it to be in the center and I want it to start on the right. So there we get a bit more space here, and that's where I want to place this welcome to the website. I actually want to place it over here on the side. So to do that, I can set the header to have a position of relative. And then this H1 and this link over here, it's inside a div. And so I can actually move and position that div using position absolute. So let's go here and I'll say class of welcome, and I want it to be positioned absolute, and I want it to be positioned on the right, and I want it to be positioned on the bottom. So there, I've now moved it around the page, moved it to the right, and moved it to the bottom. Okay. That's good for now. I actually we can set this to be, we can come back to that. This link I'd like to style so it's not just the generic blue like that. So let's quickly say welcome A, and we can add a background of white. I'll add a color of black, and we'll add some padding as well. So say 10 pixels, 20 pixels. So again, that's just a shorthand there. So 10 pixels top and bottom and 20 pixels left and right. If I only set one value, it applies it to all sides. If I set two values, it applies it top and bottom, left and right. And if I write all four, then it goes top, right, bottom, left, like that, as it goes clockwise around. Okay. Now I want to create actually a blue triangle. So this is interesting. So I'm going to create a blue triangle. Let me quickly show you in a code pen quickly how we can create a triangle using CSS. So if I have a div, there's my div, and I'm going to actually set this div to have a height of 0 pixels, a width of 0 pixels, but I'm going to give it a border of 50 pixels, and I want it to be solid, and let's say light blue. Just move this over, and then I'm going to set right, bottom, left, and I'm just going to change these colors so that we can see them more easily. You can see that we actually get triangles created using our borders. We say add 50 pixels here. You can see that these borders are actually creating little triangles. So I can use that to my advantage to be able to create a triangle on the page. So I want to just create something that goes over the behind the sections here. So to do that, I can say that welcome after. So we used that in the last week. We used this after property. And what I want to do is I basically just want to create an element after this, and then I just want to position it and create a triangle. Okay, so hopefully that can follow all of that. Again, I'm setting it like I showed you in CodePen now, with a width of 0 pixels, a height of 0 pixels, and I'm going to set a border bottom of 400 pixels solid, and then I want to just quickly grab this blue here. And I'll set a border left of 700 pixels solid, but this I want to be transparent, and I'm going to set it to be position absolute, and I'll give it bottom of 0 pixels and a right of 0 pixels. So we're placing it to be in the same position as where our content is. Now our content's just gone, so we'll need to figure out how we're going to handle that. But we can see that it's made this triangle. If I didn't set this to be transparent, you could see it would take up the other half of this rectangle, but I don't want to see that, so I set it to be transparent. Now the issue of the hidden content, well, we just need to go, what we can do there is that because what we could do to bring it to the top is say dot welcome h1, and we can set those to position relative, and we'll use z index. Again, we spoke about z index in the previous webinar. So there now we can see that the text is coming onto the page. The H1 does need a bit of work. So we can just make sure that this welcome here, can set the color to be white. So there's that coming through now. I'd also like to just add a bit of padding. So I'm going to add, let's say, 10 pixels, 20 pixels. All right. So that's looking good. So we've got our triangle. We've got our heading. I would like a little bit of space though. So maybe this could actually be just all around padding of 30 pixels. There we go. That looks a bit better. So that's now just taking it off the edge there, giving us a bit of space. What if you use before instead with the H1 and link be on top because of its flow? So we can have a look and see what happens. So instead of after, use before. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong place. Same thing happens, and the reason why the same thing happens is because we've set it to position absolute. So if I didn't have that, I think this would have an effect. Let's really have a look. Yeah, it has some effect. But because we've set position absolute, it appears absolutely where I've positioned it. And I've positioned it absolutely on the bottom and on the right. So, yeah. Well, the z-index still seems to be working the same way. Don't think it would be a problem. So I think that holds out. That you could have used either of those. It just needs to whatever this Z index needs to just override whatever that is. So if I had to set that to be a Z index of 1001, well, then it hides, or 1001 rather. So as long as that Z index is below, then that comes up to the top. Okay. The next section I want to deal with is this featured section here. So kind of have that kind of how we want. Kind of looks quite businessy, I think. So let's work on this featured section now. So maybe for this welcome, we can actually have this text align center. Maybe that looks better. I don't know. But let's focus on this featured section. So we can go to featured. And I'm going to use grid here. So I'm going to say display grid. And I'm going to set my grid template columns. So I'm going to say grid template columns to be 3. So I have 3 columns. I could also write this as if you're not too familiar with grids, what I'm doing is I'm saying I want 3 columns because I'm saying my grid template columns. I want 3 of those, and I want them to be 1FR, and 1FR stands for 1 fraction. So you could imagine that this is 1 out of 3, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 3. And so it just divides by the number of columns that there are. Okay. One issue that I've just come across there is that I get featured items on the first column, which doesn't look right. I want this to be kind of a whole row and then start with my columns below it. So to fix that, I can say dot featured, and I can say, because this, so I could say the H2 in featured, I want that to have a grid column of 1/-1. And there I get what I want. There is another way of selecting this first item inside of an element, and that is using something called first child. I get the same effect. So here, the H2 is the first child of the section featured. Maybe it makes sense to just keep it H2 so that we know it's the heading that we're targeting. But I am going to start working with the child element selector now. So what I would like is I would like every even number to have a light background and every odd numbered item to have a dark background. So it's kind of going to create a bit of like a checkered effect sort of thing. So what I can do is I can say featured, and I want the div that is the nth child, and I want the odd one, and I want it to have this blue background here. So I'm going to say background of blue. And now we can see that every odd number has this dark background. Let's add a lighter color for the text. Oh, sorry. Yep. Grid column. So what I'm saying there is I want it to start at, you can see a shorthand. Sorry, let me go here. All right. So if I hover over the element on VS Code, it actually explains to me a little bit about the selector. And it says here that grid column, shorthand for grid column start and grid column end. So here I'm saying that the grid column should start at 1 and end at -1. So effectively what that's saying is I want it to start at 1 and end there as well. So don't start at one column and end at 1. Right? So that's default. That's what's happening there normally. Is it starts at 1 and it ends in column 1. So this is column 1, column 2, column 3. So I wanted to start at column 1 and end at -1. And so that shorthand gives us this cleared row. All right, hope that's explained. And then I want this white color, right? Because that looks better. These are very close in, so let's quickly just add a little bit of padding here and also add a gap. So if I go here, I can just add a gap in my grid. So that's now adding a little bit of space between all the elements. And div. I'm going to add a padding of 20 pixels all around. And then I want to just select the even number of child elements. So I'm going to say even, spell even. And I'll grab this color here. And I don't want it to be white, so I'll just keep it black. So now we have kind of this checkered board effect here. So we don't have to add a class to each of these elements. We can just target the odd and the even ones there. Okay, so I think that's mostly what I wanted to do on this page. In terms of making it responsive, I guess the biggest thing that I could do is just manage these 6 elements here. My focus isn't really on responsiveness for this, but I can quickly show you. But it's not, the main thing I'm wanting to show you is how you can select and change things even though using the same HTML. But let me quickly show you. And so I will just want to have that really. So the selector here, and to apply that. Above 600 pixels and below 600 pixels, it can just be one column. Right, so it's one column and then it expands out to the 6. Maybe that could be coming a little bit sooner. So we could have that be, say, 800 pixels. Right, so it just comes in a little bit sooner, so before they get too squashed. But hopefully, yeah, hopefully that's been useful. I just want to, so that's the business website that I kind of designed. Hopefully it helped you learn a little bit about the triangle and also about the nth child. The next thing I'm going to design for us is the Safari style. So let's have a look at that. I'm going to just comment out the business CSS and let's start working with the safari.css. We can see how we can make that page. All right, so for this, I chose to download a font. So I downloaded Tribeca. So, I mean, I can show you the process. So what I did is I went to 1001 fonts. That's where I got it. Right, I just went to 1001 fonts and I just searched, literally just searched Safari. And there came up a bunch of Safari options. And there is Tribeca. Right, and it says this font is free for commercial use. So I can use that. That's fine. I feel like sometimes the students stick like quite closely to fonts that are used regularly on the web, and I just encourage you to broaden the horizons a little bit and use sites like 1001 Fonts, whatever. You just have to follow the guidance of what is and isn't allowed to do. So here it says the font is free for personal use. So that's fine in an academic context, but obviously if you're working for with a client that's going to go live on a real website for users, then you'll have to pay for that. But this one, for example, is free for commercial use anyway. Anyway, so I downloaded that and I placed it in this fonts folder here. And so to load the font, I have to use an @fontface rule. And I'm going to set the font family. And it's called Tribeca. And the source is fonts Tribeca. And then the format is true type. Okay, save that, and nothing happens because I haven't applied it to any of my elements yet. So I'll need to do that. I do see sometimes that students seem to just do this step and then they don't actually apply it to an element. The other thing I also sometimes find is that students take like a link to a Google style sheet. So this is a style sheet that you're linking to here, right? So Google gives you this style sheet, but it's just a style sheet filled with @fontface rules, just like we've written. Like you can just see this @fontface rules, but Google has written them for you. So assumedly they are more stable, but to have the stablest version possible, like, have it in your project, I guess. So we've got that. Let's make our headings H1, H2, and we'll set those to have a font family of Tribeca. I can set up backup fonts. Let's set Open Sans, Verdana. And there we get our nice Safari font coming through. Now I just want to set in my HTML, I've already got this quicksand font, so that's being loaded via Google. So I can go here and just want to set that on the body. So always set a font on the body. That way you know that all your text is going to be styled. Times New Roman is not very good looking and kind of feels a bit outdated. So yeah, let's say Helvetica. Yeah, let's go with that. All right, so now we get our quicksand coming through and the Tribeca font. Okay, so I'd like to add a background to my header. So let's quickly have a look at that. I'll come back to the body element in a bit. And I want to add a background. Let me just quickly grab the color. And so I'm going to add that color. And I want to add a URL for a background image. And that's going to be called leaves. There we are. Yeah, and it's got a tip there for people. So if you run into trouble with including fonts in your projects, place the fonts folder in your styles or CSS folder. Firefox is a bit picky about folder structure. Cool. Thanks for that, Anders. So now I've got my background image there. I would like the main to have a background of white. And I'd like this to have a color white here. Also want to set a background size here. That stretches across, and let's actually add some padding as well. Okay, so slowly getting there. One thing that I want though is what I'd like is to have this be 2 columns. So the body to have kind of 2 columns. So this I'll have kind of a heading on this side and a this text and featured items on the right. So to do that, I'll jump across here and I'm going to set it to display grid. And I'll set my grid template columns to have 2 columns like that, right? So I've got now kind of this 2 columns here. It will improve. And I would like, so I've got this welcome section. So I want a green on this welcome section. So we've got this welcome. And I'll set that to text align center. Background of this green, which I added here. So that same green. And a padding of 20 pixels. All right, that looks a bit better. Oh, that's misspelled there. That's looking a bit better. I've also next thing I want to do is I want to just change this link to be white. So and have a background. So we're going to say welcome a background of white, color of this green here. I'll add a padding 10px, 20px like that. I'm going to set it to display block. And then I just want to set the width to be 200 pixels and have a margin of auto. Right, so that's just centering it there in the middle. And then on hover, I'd like just a little transition. So we can add transition of background color. And we can set it to be 0.5 seconds. So that when welcome A is hovered, we can change the background. Let's grab this here quickly. Just kind of this light green here. Right, so need to set that to say color. It's not transitioning. If anyone can spot what I've done, I think that's fine. Not sure why that's not transitioning. Aha, typo. Thank you very much. There we go. Now it's working. Thanks for that. Okay. So we got that now displaying. We can maybe just consider, yeah, I think that looks all right for now. So can I have this heading section here and the section on the right? I don't know if we'd quite want to give over this much space on an actual website, but it's meant to feel kind of like a Safari jungle feel. So bear with me if it's, not to your taste. It's at least a bit of fun. The next section we can deal with is the featured section again. And this time I'm going to, let's go over here. And again, here in featured, I'm going to use display grid and here I want 2 columns. Again, I have that same issue with the H2. So I'll fix that quickly. Featured H2, and I want that to be grid column 1 minus 1. Okay. Now what I want is the divs to have a background. So let's quickly do that. So they can have this same background as that hover. So they'll have that. I want a little gap between them so that they can stand out by themselves. So we'll add a gap of, say, 20 pixels or 10 pixels maybe. That looks all right. I actually like a little gap here because this gets quite close to the edge there. So let's just add a gap on the body. So we'll add a gap of, let's say, make it 20 pixels. All right, so it's got that gap now. Maybe it looks better then to match those. So let's have that same gap on those. Right, so now the gap between that edge is the same as those. Cool. What I would like to do is I'm going to place these headings and I'm going to place them vertically. So let me quickly show you what the original kind of what I'm working with. Let me quickly. Right, so I want these items to actually run vertically down like that. So we'll just see how we can do that using CSS. All right. So to do that, we can set these divs to have a position of relative. And then what we're going to do is we're going to absolute position these H3s and we're going to rotate them. So that'll be fun. So we'll say dot featured div H3. So if I was allowed to change the HTML, I would be using classes here. But I kind of decided kind of strictly not to touch the HTML. So the HTML for both is going to be exactly identical. So that's why I'm kind of using these longer selectors rather than classes, but you could use classes. But yeah, I just haven't. So you can set position. Well, I misspelled that. Those to be absolute positioned. And what I want is, so you can see now they're taken out of normal document flow. But because I've set it to position relative, these headings all take their absolute position based on the parent with positioning. So if I had to remove that, no, it didn't do what I was expecting. Whoops. Because there's probably something else there. But anyway, we'll just leave it as position relative there. What I want to do is I want to change them. So let's go transform. And I'm going to use something called rotate. And I want it to rotate 90 degrees. So with some of these things, I might not have covered rotating things 90 degrees in the HTML and CSS course. And that's kind of just because there's a huge wealth of things that you can do with CSS. And so if there's things that you're wanting to do, chances are if you Google around, look on MDN, you'll be able to find all kind of these sorts of things, which you might not have known about originally. But here's one, transform, and you can rotate things 90 degrees. I would like to set it to have well, first thing I need to do is, because I've used transform, I actually need to change the origin of kind of where it can take its left and top, because is it top that way or is it top that way? So this element, is the top there or is the top there? So we just need to set that. And so to do that, we can use something called transform origin is what it's called. And we can just set 0 and 0. So now it takes its positioning at 0 and 0 on this element. So there. Cool. And it's just shared a link about rotating elements, which you can check out. I'd like that this H3 has a background. So I'm going to just set this background to be the green we've been using, our primary green. Right, so that's green. And let's set the color to be white. Now I need to make it, I need to shift it. I want to shift it onto that element there. So we can use left 30 pixels. So that works. Also want to set the height of this element to be 30 pixels. There we go. Now that matches up. And now we have this thing where the height of this item is not the same height as this. So it kind of looks a bit weird. So to fix that, what I can do is that I can set the div to have I'm going to use a min height. And now when we're looking at this from a responsive point of view, I'll come back to that. But usually a good idea to use a min height, because eventually at some point, let me quickly show you. You'll see that the lines wrap down. So although it's quite short at this viewpoint, when you get to a different viewport, it's going to be much bigger because, well, just these are, the lines, there's more lines to take up. But we can get to that a little bit later. And then I'll set the same min height on my H3. No, I won't do that. I need to set this to be a min width. Sorry, min width, because I'm just going widthwise. And there's something else that's not right yet. So let's quickly look through the code. See what I've done wrong. come back to it. We'll figure it out. So you can see that the heading now goes over the paragraph, so we need to move our paragraph up a bit. Probably the easiest solution is just adding a margin on the left, which works all right. Let me quickly try here. If I go top, man, I remember that there was something about this, but I can't remember now what I did to solve it. Man. As you can see, if you look closely, it's not quite lining up. You can see there's a little gap. I think I tried this as a bad solution. I think there's marginal padding on something. That's what it is. Let's add margin of 0 pixels. So there's margin on the heading. I'll quickly show you in the dev tools. That's what it was. So you can see there when I hover, that's yellow. That's showing you the margin. So if I look in layouts, you can see there it's adding this 18.72. That's why if I use 19, it almost is correct, but it's adding this 18.72 margin. So if I drop my margin to 0 pixels and I don't worry about my top, then it works out exactly right. So you can see now it's sitting exactly correctly where I want it. Okay. It's enjoyable debug. And then, cool. So, yeah, I also want this H3 to actually have a text line of center. That looks a bit better. And maybe this margin could be just increased a little bit. Yeah, that looks a bit better now. I don't think I have more to show here in terms of this. Yeah, I mean, I can show you how to make this responsive, but it's kind of not the main thing I was really focusing in on here. But the main thing that I really want you to take away from here is that if you change the, so just by changing styling, you can control quite a bit of the page. So you can control colors, control fonts, you can control how you select items, and you control quite a lot of things. So yeah, I hope that that's been helpful and interesting. Things like that, maybe a bit cool. And yeah, is there any questions? Cool. If there's no questions, then I guess that's it for the webinar. I don't have much more to show. Yeah, sure. I'll zip it, and I can drop it in the chat. Cool. Yeah, no problem. All right. I think if that's that, then we can close things down.